If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out the full lineup. For news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
Last month, Forum Communications looked into whether the Batmobile was impounded by Fargo Police in 1968. And whether one certain child might know the answer. Hi, this is Tracy Briggs, and welcome to Back Then. Perhaps it's fitting that Batman has been called the world's greatest detective, since he sent many of us this last month, including me, down a rabbit hole of sleuthing fit for Sherlock Holmes, Columbo, or the Caped Crusader himself. The question arose in a Back Then column from May 24th about whether the Batmobile was really impounded by a Fargo police officer during a visit to the city, as claimed by Batmobile designer George Barris in a YouTube video clip from 2008. Despite his claim, I came up short in proving it happened. Fargo City records showed no evidence that Barris was arrested or his famous car had been impounded, as he claimed it had been. We did have proof that the car was here. The State Historical Society of North Dakota shared a film with us of WDAY newsman Howard Graber driving it down the street during an appearance at a car show in November of 1968. Now, if you have not seen this video, I urge you to go to inform.com and take a look at it. It is really, really cute. I used to work with Howard Graber many years ago, and he was just a lovely, lovely man. And this video of him in the Batmobile just kind of brings me back to some good memories of working with Howard way back in the 80s. So do take a look at that at inform.com. Anyway, reporter Howard Graber said nothing about any trouble with the law during the Batmobile visit to Fargo. But in the story, he did offer another possible clue. He mentioned that a child would win a ride to school in the Batmobile the following week. Well, the only problem is we couldn't find any evidence of who this child was. There was nothing in the form and no WDAY film that we could see. So we wanted to find out who this child was. We figured if we could prove that child did get the ride to school, then maybe we could prove the car was not impounded. But again, we didn't know who the child was. So we had a lot of questions and very few answers. Cue the superhero music. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Jay Thomas? Yeah, I know that's the wrong superhero, but, give me a break. Anyway, Jay is the host of the Jay Thomas Show on WDAY AM, and he's been a real friend to Back Then and The Vault on Inform. He loves a good mystery. He's had me on his show a couple of times for a little nostalgic chat, including an enlightening discussion we had recently about Al Capone and the mob's presence in Minnesota during Prohibition. So when he invited me on the show to talk about the Batmobile mysteries in Fargo, I jumped at the chance. Not only does Jay like mysteries, he's a car guy. So he and his listeners might steer me in the right direction, pardon the pun, for the Batmobile impoundment in Fargo mystery. Right out of the gate, people called in with their leads and theories. Some recalled a tough-as-nails stickler of a Fargo police officer who sounded like a guy that would have pulled over the Batmobile for things like insufficient windshield wipers and taillights. Another person suggested that maybe the arresting officer would have been with the state patrol since he shared the name Wilbur, just like Barris recalled in his impoundment story. But perhaps our most promising lead came in trying to identify the child who won a ride to school in the Batmobile. Jay took a call from a man named Randy Brovold, who said he remembers the day the Batmobile rolled into his neighborhood to pick up his friends and neighbors, Debbie and Linda Bewer. They all went to school together at nearby Lewis and Clark Elementary School. Before they took off in the car, he remembers all of the neighbor kids, including him, getting a chance to sit in the Batmobile. So, I left Jay's studio that day with some awesome leads to follow, and I got even more help the next day in my email inbox. The next morning, I opened an email from a man in Indiana named Mark Rakup. To say he's a Batman fan is a colossal understatement. A Batman lover since childhood, he now owns a company called Fiberglass Freaks, and he is the only person licensed in the world by DC Comics and Warner Brothers to sell and build 1966 Batmobile replicas. In the email, Ray Kupp explained that Barris told many versions of that Batmobile pulled over by the police story over the years. Sometimes the only difference was in the city where it supposedly happened. I knew we needed to chat. Ray Kupp was full of information during our Zoom chat. Not surprising since he's writing a book and constructing a 6,000 square foot Batman museum in his home state. Perhaps most interesting in our conversation is that the very car seen in the film clips out of Fargo is a car that is in his garage right now. He's restoring it for a client. And he confirms it is one of a handful of authentic Batmobiles associated with the TV show, which ran from 1966 to 1968. But what about the impoundment story in Fargo? Did it really happen? Ray Kupp said he can't be sure, but it helps to know a little more about George Barris, who died in 2015. Ray Kupp said, the rest of the story was pretty much verbatim with your Fargo story, in front of the judge and so forth. I think this is the basis for the story that was later embellished and told again and again, depending on where he was. He would say, I was in Fargo, or I was in Indianapolis, I was in so-and-so. Ray Kupp also sent me newspaper clippings from 1989 from Billings, Montana, that mentioned the car being pulled over as it went on a donut run for a radio station. Radio stations back then were known to stage pranks for ratings. On Jay's show and later, I heard from some familiar with law enforcement at the time. Some said the story of the Batmobile getting pulled over in Fargo sounded kind of familiar. Others said they knew nothing about it. So again, we had no concrete proof that the impoundment happened here. Ray Kupp said, short of finding written proof from city records, it's hard to tell if the Fargo story is true. But, he says, there might be just a hint of truth to it based on that story out of L.A. He said, almost everything is true in Hollywood, but not necessarily at that moment in time, or maybe even that particular person. And that's kind of what I think was going on here. However, one thing we can prove absolutely did happen was the story of a child winning a ride to school in the Batmobile in Fargo. After following Randy Brovold's lead and scrolling through Facebook and finding mutual friends, we found Debbie and Linda Bewer. They are indeed the lucky kids who rode to school in the Batmobile in 1968. Linda, a kindergartner at the time, actually won the prize after her name was drawn from a contest entry box at a car show she attended with her dad. Debbie, her first grade sister, was given a ride as well. Linda now lives in Florida and Debbie in Arizona, but I was lucky enough to do a Zoom call with them while Debbie was visiting Linda in Florida. The sisters seemed to get a kick out of the whole story. Linda said, honestly, I don't really remember it all that well, but over the years, I have used this story as an icebreaker at work. You know, when you're supposed to say something you may not know about me or something like that. I say, what you don't know about me is that I once got to ride in the real Batmobile. She says these days it's impressing her young grandson. She said, he has a Batman bedroom, even a big life-size Batman. So he was like, oh my gosh. He's excited, and it's fun because he's the age I was when I got the ride. Debbie, being 1 year older, remembers a little bit more about the Batmobile pulling into their driveway that late November day in 1968. She said, I remember walking outside and it was cold. Linda added, I remember it because we have those hats with the big snowballs coming down. They also remember a man dressed up like Batman picking them up, and some neighbor kids, including Randy, getting a peek inside the car. But then it was time for their ride to Lewis and Clark Elementary, just a few blocks away. Linda said, we were both so small we could just sit in that one seat in the front. It probably wouldn't be legal now, but we didn't need to wear seatbelts at that time. The sisters remember being a little overwhelmed when many of their classmates at Lewis and Clark greeted them. Linda said, the whole school for some reason was there watching us. I don't know if they got tipped off that we were coming or what. Fortunately, Debbie had film of their ride tucked away for the past 55 years. We just had it digitized for this story. And again, I would urge you to watch it. It is in the story on inform.com, and it's really fun. You know, it kind of shows a little wear and tear from history, but I think it's kind of fun because if you went to Lewis and Clark Elementary School in the fall of 68 and kind of figure out that maybe you went to Fargo South High and you would have graduated in anywhere between 1976 and 1981, you might very well see yourself in this video. As they said, the kids were swarming this Batmobile. So check out that film on inform.com. Undoubtedly, some of the kids swarming the Batmobile that day were probably bigger Batman fans than the Beaver sisters. Linda said she doesn't really even remember watching it, while Debbie remembers the show and its whams and pows. But they certainly weren't huge fans. However, Ultimate Batman fan Mark Raycup says it doesn't really matter that two little girls who were only casual viewers at best won the ride he would have loved as a kid. He said, to quote Batman and Batman Forever, "Chicks dig the car." He said that with a laugh, by the way. So, did the Batmobile get impounded in Fargo? My guess is no. But two sisters, now grown women, did have a ride to school they'll probably never forget. In my mind, that's a better story anyway. Thanks for joining me on Back Then. I hope you'll catch me next time.
When you can't make it to City Hall or the school board meetings, local journalists from Inforum.com will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at Inforum.com.